Hey, it's Rebecca Lieb.
And I'm Jason Horton.
And we are Ghost Town, a show about weird history, hauntings, unexplained events, true crime, and all kinds of bizarre phenomenon the world over.
From unsolved murders to haunted manors.
Satanic panic to internet mysteries.
Buy a ticket to our abandoned amusement park.
A VIP ghost pass to our haunted club?
No.
Bottle service.
We have new episodes of Ghost Town every Wednesday and Friday, and you can find Ghost Town wherever you get your podcasts.
FearScape Media Network. Exploring the unknown, one podcast at a time.
Support for this podcast comes from the Psychic Social Experiment. What is the Psychic Social Experiment?
What is the Psychic Social Experiment?
What is the Psychic Social Experiment?
The Psychic Social Experiment from the FearScape Media Network, happening April 23rd at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join the spooky crew of FearScape Paranormal Podcast, the rock and roll ghost hunter himself, Keith Age, and famed psychic medium, Scotty Rorick, for a psychic social experiment. Scotty, whose mission is to bring spiritual understanding to people searching for answers, will lead everyone in an interactive remote seance via Zoom to attempt to contact the spirits of a famous paranormal location. Be a part of this live studio audience for this fun and interactive live YouTube show and event. The event will begin with Scotty leading a meditation to heighten our intention and set the stage for the spirits to come and convey their messages. When the seance is complete, your hosts will be asking some of you to share in what you experienced and felt during the meditation, and see if many or even all had a shared experience that others can corroborate. It will be a fantastic evening of communing with the spirits, and potentially for some, very transformative. Don't miss out on this opportunity to expand your mind and broaden your psychic horizons. Tickets are only $6 and are now available at www.fearscapemedia.com/psychic. Act now to secure your spot for this amazing event and YouTube show.
The SCP multiverse is under constant assault, and destruction can come at any moment. Therefore, having just one database is a folly the Foundation can no longer accept. Join Dr. Kevin Milgram and SCP-073, Kang, as they create an oral history of the SCP Foundation, in Memories of Kang, an SCP story, hosted by Daniel Doremus. For should the Foundation fall, the unkillable first murderer of man will live on. New episodes drop every second Wednesday of the month on the FearScape Media Network. Visit fearscapemedia.com for more information.
Thank you for tuning in to FearScape Paranormal Podcast. We are on a journey to understand and to discover the phenomena that seems to exist all around the globe. We invite you to join us on this journey into the unknown.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another, just wow, I gotta say this ahead of time, Josh, just another wow episode of FearScape Paranormal Podcast. We are so lucky. I'm just gonna tell you, you're gonna shut up. FearScape Paranormal Podcast here on the FearScape Media Network. This is your host, Stefan Gerhardt, and I am joined, as always, by my lighter-than-air co-host, Josh Rutledge. What up, Joshy Poo?
I'm just up here floating, man. Just up here floating.
Just floating. Well, good thing, because, if they were floating down there, you want to get out of there, because Pennywise is going to get you. So I'm glad you're floating up there. Glad you're floating up there, man. But holy crap, man. What an amazing episode we have today.
Oh, yeah.
We have Pulitzer Prize-Winning Journalist and author Ralph Blumenthal. Ralph Blumenthal, he won his Pulitzer Prize. He broke the story on the 1993 Trade Center bombing that happened back in 93. Didn't take the building down. This is a smaller one, but still, he won that award then. But he's also, to us, big time because he's the one that broke the story on the videos that the Pentagon released, right?
Yeah, co-author.
He's the co-author there. But the biggest reason we've got him to get on our show today was that he wrote an amazing book called The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. And this is all about Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatrist John Mack, who just did some amazing work in the field of ufology. And he wasn't even a believer when he started. He just wanted to take a look at things through the eyes of psychology to see what happens. And then from there, it just goes crazy. And we're going to talk to Ralph about all of that. And just, I'm just in awe, dude. Like, because, not to break your fairy tale here, but we pre-recorded the interview. And so I already know what's coming. And it's fascinating, man. Wow.
It is probably one of the best conversations that we've had of late, and we have had some amazing conversations of late.
Man, just what an incredible guy. And it's interesting because Ralph too has his own skepticism coming from things, but became a believer because it's fascinating. And we'll get to that. I promise you. So we're going to have Ralph Blumenthal on here shortly. But we want to get through our segments so we can get to that. But let's get to our first segment then, Josh, which is, as always, I'm coming, honey buns, the psychic word of the week. And now, the psychic word of the week. Psychic word of the week comes from, as usual, the Encyclopedic Psychic Dictionary by June G. Bletzer. Rest in peace, honey buns. And we flipped through the pages, and this time I flipped to the page 370, and what I landed on was magnetic self-healing. Magnetic self-healing. Magnetic self-healing, to intensify the magnetic nerve fluid within oneself and use it to energize or heal one's body. I didn't know we had magnetic nerve fluid. Just wanted to put that out there. I didn't know that was.
I mean, I think it makes sense because people wear like magnetic bracelets and stuff, and that's supposed to help you.
There's a whole thing, like a page back about it too. I'll just read real quickly. It says magnetic nerve fluid is an invisible electromotive energy field which runs throughout all three nervous systems, and its substance is vital to sustain life. And then it goes on longer and longer. But yeah, you're right. I wonder if that does have a lot to do with that. Like those copper bracelets and those magnetic bracelets are supposed to make a big difference, and I wonder if that's why. Good to know. Anyways, it continues on. The magnetism that normally flows in the left hand is concentrated upon and directed out the right palm. Right palm is held a few inches above the congested area to loosen and break up the congestion, or is held a few inches over the head to energize the whole body. Deep breaths will increase the magnetism as it flows. Interesting, because that's how, so I do energetic healing. And that's essentially what I do. Like I do Reiki now, so it's a little bit different because I pull from a different source. But back then I used to use my left hand and I would pull in energy from the universe. Like that's how I envisioned it. And it would travel through my body to mix with my energy to create the healing aspect and come out the right hand. And I would heal with that hand. So it's interesting that's what it is. Cause and that was just something I did on my own. Like I never learned. I just wanted to heal, and so I just thought that's how you should do it.
It's like the guy who first discovered Reiki.
Right.
He just did that on his own. Right. He just did that on his own, and then it turned out to be a thing.
Yeah. He saw all these symbols and all this stuff, and he chose certain symbols that he believed were the ones that would be the best.
But my point is that he had to discover it.
Yes,
it was a thing before him, but nobody knew about it officially until he discovered it.
Right,
but
which is how I feel about anything metaphysical.
Right, yeah, right. So it's always been there. Just so one day somebody officially discovers it, but that doesn't mean that people weren't tapping into it for long before then, not knowing what it was called or what it was, right? So,
Very interesting. But yeah, just again, strange because it's specific left hand to right hand. And I used to try to push as much because I used to get bronchitis a lot because I used to smoke back in the day. And so I used to try to do that. And I would try to break up that congestion. So it's weird to me, man. Junji Bletzer, she knows me. She knows me.
Well, it's like that. So I went through our good friend Santosh. Had a course, a sigils course, and I went through his sigils course.
I've been through it, yeah.
And from that, one of the outcomes is I end up with this fountain in my sacred space and internally. And the other night, I was laying in bed and I was having some irritable bowel stuff going on, and I was like in a lot of pain and I couldn't get rid of it. And so I just internalized and I went to my fountain and I drank the water from my fountain and I visualized it, kind of going down through my body and taking away the pain. And it did, man. It's like as soon as I visualized it, the pain was gone and I didn't have any problems the rest of the night.
Yep. I've had my sacred garden set up for a long time, and that fountain is so key because it can never be tainted. It can never be poisoned. It's always the temperature that you want it to be. And there have been times especially when I was going through a lot of depression and things like that, I would be in the shower and I would be in my garden so I could get the extra physical sensory of it and feel as if that was the fountain. Or sometimes I'll actually take a drink of water while also being in there to get that extra physical sense. And it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So absolutely very cool. Well, let's get moving on because I want to get to Ralph. But let's go ahead and move to, we haven't had this in a minute. What? Someone's whispering that it's time for the cryptid of the week.
Hey y'all, it's the Jersey Devil. Hope y'all are ready to meet some of my friends.
Cryptid of the week.
All right, cryptid of the week, the Jersey. So, sidebar here: Jersey Devil's mad because he didn't make that A through Z list that's been going around the internet, A through Z of cryptids. That Jersey Devil was not on the list, and I gotta say, I agree with him. Because there were some weird ones on the list, and I would have put something else in that place, but they did not put the Jersey Devil. I don't even remember what they actually put, but I don't want to talk about it. You are up in my face right now. I'm defending you. So, okay. Back off. Okay. But I agree with him. But yeah, so, but anyways, so he's going to sit over in the corner and sulk. So what do we got? Which of his friends are we talking about this week?
So this one comes from Perth, Australia, known as the drop bear.
The drop bear.
It is a cousin of the koala bear. And like the koala, it is arboreal, tree dwelling, but they say it's a meat eater. It couldn't care less about eucalyptus leaves. It hates Vegemite. And the slogan, "Look up, stay alive," was created in the drop bear's honor. According to legend and the Australian Museum's website, the drop bear is a ferocious, large dog-sized koala cousin lurking in the continent's high places. Lying in wait, the sharp-toothed carnivore lingers until an unsuspecting meal gets close. Without warning, it drops from its perch to make the kill.
I imagine it also kind of looks like a koala bear, and so you're aren't you just cute? And it just eats your face, man.
So it says the initial impact often stuns the prey, allowing it to be bitten on the neck and quickly subdued.
Oh my God.
Local experts are quick to warn hiking tourists of the drop bear danger. Foreign visitors quake at the thought of a giant killer koala ending their lives and their vacations with one swipe.
Oh my God, y'all. You need to Google image search drop bear. It is frightening because they got real pictures of koalas, I guess, yawning or something, but they make their eyes red and it's scary, dude. There's this one soaking wet and mad. Oh man. These are creepy.
So it says when paleontologists found a stash of bones inside southwestern Australia's tight entrance cave, it included an intriguing Ice Age marsupial named Tylocoleo carnifex. There you go. Which the translation is marsupial lion. To their delight, its articulated bones closely resemble the description of the fictional drop bear. Fictional, my ass. So yeah. The paws of the drop bear were equipped with powerful claws that could have easily climbed trees or steep rock faces to hunt or rest. Claw marks within the cave confirm the power of its pounce. So yeah.
Interesting. So apparently there's also a mammoth drop bear. There's the regular common drop bear, which is 1 meter, and then the mammoth drop bear is 5 meters, and I think that more fits that dinosaur version you were just talking about. Very, very interesting. And by the way, the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, H, blah, 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 the J is jackalope, and that's why he's super mad because he lives out in Arizona now here with me, and so he's kind of mad because he hangs with the jackalopes all the time. It got super crusty that they got chosen over him because there's only one of him, but there's like a bazillion jackalope.
So I feel like, though, that's still an injustice because technically he's the New Jersey Devil.
Mm-hmm.
So, it should be at least be in the N.
Is it, or was that area just Jersey at the time? I don't know.
Back in the 1700s.
Yep. So
really interesting to hear a little anecdotal information. Rockstar Games in Grand Theft Auto 5, there is a chance to hunt and play as a Sasquatch.
Well, I'm going to have to get that now.
It says unlocking the prize wasn't easy. And according to a report on Kotaku.com, the clues were well hidden. But a team of code readers called Code Walkers slowly pieced together the requirements.
Interesting. But I definitely see, I'm looking here like N, where New Jersey Devil would be just Nessie. So I would say Jersey Devil's his nickname. New Jersey Devil is what he is, because like the Loch Ness Monster should be L, right? But no, it's the Frog Man. And then they've got Sasquatch and Yeti, 2 different things. And I'm like, okay, you're stretching it here.
Yeah. Who put together that list?
I have no idea. I don't know.
I feel like they just went and bought a cryptid card deck and then just thumb through it until they came across a letter.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a little quick sidebar spooky news. There's a children's museum. Forget where now. I can't think of it offhand, but they are creating a whole big cryptid thing to teach kids about myths and lore and folklore of animals and creatures. So I think that's really cool. So essentially there's going to be a big cryptid museum section at a children's museum. I think it might be awesome. In Indiana. I can't remember though. But anyways, let's move on, man. We'll get out of here. I'm not even bothered with Jersey Devil. He's really down right now. So anyways, let's get moving on to the UAP sighting of the week. All right, UAP sighting of the week, Josh. I'm doing it this week because I found something that I thought was really interesting. So UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, UFO sighting of the week. And this week we pulled from MUFON again because we love us some MUFON. Shout out to Shane Hurd. Anyways, I was looking through the last 20 sighting reports, and immediately the short description jumped at me. It said wormhole-shaped tunnel, and I said, I'm in. So this came from Winter Park, Florida. It was actually came in today, but the event date was March 14th. So here's what we got here.
At 6:04 a.m., Elon Musk rocket launched during a new moon, cloud-free sky without winds. At 6:20 a.m. on March 14th, 2021, my neighbor and I with my dog were walking due east in line with Cape Canaveral, Florida, as the crow flies. My home is perhaps 75 miles from Cape Canaveral due east. My neighbor had shown me where 20 plus minutes earlier she observed a perfect Musk rocket launch in the clear sky. From that standpoint, the rocket was pin needle sized. We began our walk, but returned to my home for a moment. She stood at the driveway edge with my dog, and as I walked only moments later to her, I was shocked by the most intense blue triangle shape, and I snapped my iPhone 6 pic. Although my phone was not set for dark, I still got images. As we walked about 700 feet down my street, I continued taking pictures. As we reached a point away from the trees, we watched the rings and elongation transpire over a couple of minutes. We were not the only ones to report this, and I added a third-person report from the news indicating it is gases from the rocket, but you decide. I noticed in the news report the pic of a weird green light object above the tunnel or wormhole shape as I saw it, and on the far top left of one of my pics, you will indeed see a sharp yellow dot, and a couple small white dots in the tunnel center that show and then don't show. I'm perplexed that the gases occurred over Winter Park, Florida. A sharp yellow dot and a couple small white dots in the tunnel center that show.
Wow.
Yep, and he does. His pictures are pretty remarkable. They look really cool, and you can see that yellow light that you're wondering, why is that there? What is it? It's too big to be a star or anything, and it's not like the normal yellow of a plane. It is almost like a greenish yellow. And then that cloud-shaped vortex thing that he sees, it changes colors too. It's quite fascinating. It's pretty interesting, and there's a ton of pictures. But yeah, even he said he shows the news article that he got from the newspaper there in Winter Park. So
if I was a field investigator, I would say that the yellow light is glare from the street lamp.
Well, I mean, he said he's not the only one that reported it.
Yeah.
So it's not just glare on his camera. He's saying other people also saw this green light. So you're saying there's glare in the sky. There's no cloud in that area where the green light is. That glare is going to create a point like that's moving.
Well, all there is stills, and in the picture that he included that he found online, there's a glare. There's the light that he's talking about corresponds with the angle of a street light that's also in the frame. So it could very well be that the person who took that picture and sent it to the news also had glare on their phone.
I mean, that again, when do we stop saying things are coincidental and they start becoming synchronicities? That a guy that's completely different in a different location, different neighborhood than him, happens to have the exact same glare effect on two different phones.
Well, and I can tell you that there's another picture that he uploaded that the glare is towards the bottom of the picture because the angle of the camera is different and the angle of the light is different. But that same kind of greenish, yellowish tint can be seen at the bottom of that picture on like what appears to be the road, again indicating that it would be glare from the camera lens.
Yeah. I don't know. I just, to me, it's too coincidental. As far as the vortex is concerned, to me, it just looks like clouds for the most part. But that green light, and you can even say it's got a little bit of a tail coming off of it. I mean, it looks like it's moving. And you know, if we trust these reports, you know, and we have to trust the people that put them in, you know, the people that he was there with, that woman, she saw it too. So, it's not something he saw in post. He saw it live happening, the green light. So I don't know, very, very interesting. Definitely, boy, I would love to read the report whenever the MUFON investigator reaches out to them, because I want to know some more about it. And I do find it interesting that it's right after Elon Musk sent a rocket ship up.
Yep.
So
definitely interesting.
All right, well, let's get moving on, Josh. Let's get to our interview with Ralph Blumenthal, our Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author. We're going to take a quick ad break, but as soon as we come back, please stick around. We're going to dig deep with Ralph Blumenthal. Hey, blanket huggers, Stefan here from FearScape Paranormal Podcast, and do we have a scary good deal for you right now? If you head over to fearscapepodcast.com/Gamefly, you can get a 30-day free trial Gamefly subscription on us. Now, if you're not familiar with Gamefly, it's a game and movie rental service where you can play the hottest video games for systems like the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, or even the PS4. You can get up to 2 games or movies out at a time, and you can do that an unlimited amount of times a month. Josh and I love to play our game systems, and I am really enjoying the Final Fantasy VII Remake right now. And if you're like me, games are too expensive to buy and beat in the same weekend. Well, with Gamefly, you can get it and keep a game as long as you need. Then you just send it back and get the next game on your list. So head on over to fearscapepodcast.com/Gamefly today and give it a try.
Hey, it's Rebecca Lieb.
And I'm Jason Horton.
And we are Ghost Town, a show about weird history, hauntings, unexplained events, true crime, and all kinds of bizarre phenomenon the world over.
From unsolved murders to haunted manors.
Satanic panic to internet mysteries.
Buy a ticket to our abandoned amusement park.
A VIP ghost pass to our haunted club?
No.
Bottle service.
We have new episodes of Ghost Town every Wednesday and Friday, and you can find Ghost Town wherever you get your podcasts.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys for sticking around after the ad break. As we promised, we have Ralph Blumenthal here. Thank you so much, Ralph, for coming on to FearScape, man. It is an absolute pleasure and an absolute honor to have you on the show.
Thanks,
sir.
guys.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of jump into it a little bit, because for anybody who may not pick up the name and reference it, I mean, you've been a reporter for quite some time. For me, you came into my frame of reference with the co-author for the 2017 article that broke the Pentagon UFOs. But I mean, you've done a lot of reporting before that even took place.
I'm a latecomer to the UFO scene, and I started on the John Mack book, The Believer, in 2004. So even that was pretty late in my newspaper career, which started in 1964. So I got a lot to catch up on.
Wow. Well, we've both had an opportunity to read the book, and it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
We knew a little bit about Mac, but now I feel like, he's family, right? That's what these books tend to do. But it's also fascinating to see not only the perspective of Max and to see how it aligns with a lot of the stuff we talk about on the show, but you can't help but see some of your own personality shine behind a lot of that as well, to see how, and like you said, you've become late to the UFO game too, but how did following this story really kind of change your life?
Because it really opened up a world of spirituality to me. I had some of that, growing up. I grew up like John Mack in a kind of conventional German Jewish secular household where we didn't do a lot of, religious observance. But I always had some kind of spiritual belief that there was something bigger than us out there, and something more than, the 3 or 4 dimensions that we call reality. But the more I looked over Mac's shoulder in the course of, researching and writing this book, the more I was convinced that there really is more to existence than what we can immediately touch and see around us. So I was very taken with the research he did. I talked to experiencers myself, and I was, I myself have not had an abduction experience. I have not seen a UFO like John Mack. Both of us were pure the way he said it. But I've come to believe that there's a lot going on that's out there that we don't know about.
Yeah, it's fascinating. My brother is a big staunch skeptic and atheist, and this book I lent to him, and he read through and immediately had to get his own copy. And he said he loved the way that Mac approached things because it was how he would do it as well, because he's never had any experiences either but it really opened his eyes to a lot of things. And I think that's what's fascinating about Mack's story is coming at it from the psychological aspect and all these different things, and really trying to find true data points to give those believers, especially that have an analytical mind, an opportunity to take a look at this and not feel so crazy, I guess.
Right. You know, it reminds me of your brother. When I hear about the skeptics who, poo-poo this whole thing, or, call people who come forward with abduction experiences crazy, or this is silly, there's nothing to it, the ridicule aspect. I feel like saying, you can be a skeptic, but first do your homework and read the material, because there's a lot of material out there that you have to be familiar with, and then you can be a skeptic. But I believe that once you go through this material and you read the accounts, and they're basically consistent accounts, you go through all that and you study the field, you cannot be just such a complete skeptic. You have to deal with the information. You can't just say it's not true. Right. You have to account for it somehow.
Well, you can't just be an ostrich and bury your head in the sand and hope it'll go away. That being a skeptic, I think I think some people sometimes think that they're being a skeptic just by saying no, but that's not really what skepticism is. Skepticism is no until proven otherwise, right? And so,
right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, is most people, and I'm sure we've done it a number of times too, but yeah, skeptic is not necessarily a disbeliever. It is someone who has an open mind and then will look into things until they can either A, find a rational answer, or B, not find one. Like they're open to look into it.
I start off my book with the story of the alien abduction conference at MIT in 1992 that John Mack attended. And the conference drew atomic scientists and theologians and psychologists, psychiatrists, folklorists, people from a wide range of disciplines, and they were all grappling with this one central mystery, which is what the hell happened to these people from a broad cross-section of humanity, including kids as young as 2 years old who say, little man, take me up into the sky. I fly in the sky. And these kids have not read UFO books, and they've not gone to the movies.
Right. Yeah.
So, what accounts it? So all these people put their heads together. They produced a very thick volume called Alien Discussions that came out 2 years later. And if you want to be a skeptic, read a book like that first, and then say, you're a skeptic. Right. What are you a skeptic about? I mean, what is there about this, information coming forward that you don't trust or you don't believe?
Yeah, I think a lot of self-proclaimed skeptics are really, in my opinion, more lazy than anything. It's just easier to not have to look into it, and easier to say, well, that's dumb, that's crazy. That's not a skeptic to me. Again, like I said, that's just someone who doesn't believe in anything.
That's in my opinion, an ignorant person.
This is what John Mack had to deal with. What I like to say is that he was always searching for intelligent life on Earth, including at Harvard.
That's good. I was just thinking the other day, because I have read Leslie Kean's book as well, the general. I'm going to totally butcher the name. Generals
and
UFO.
The political leaders speak out on UFOs.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And I would say that to me, that book is very much about the nuts and bolts of ufology. Whereas your book is very much more of the spiritual side, the spiritual aspect of what it means to be a contactee and an abductee, almost more the metaphysical side of ufology. Not that we necessarily have a UFO that we can go take a picture of that's at the Smithsonian that we can all see and touch and feel, but yeah, I mean it's very much, I think, the contrast, and I must say that although from a skeptic's point of view, the people who require nuts and bolts details, right, to be able to look at Leslie Kean's book, it maybe provides that additional detail, but also for the folks that, and I know of a few myself, who from a religious aspect find it hard to accept that contactees or abductees could be a thing simply because of their religious upbringing and what it would mean to them from a, God created us in his own image. What if others exist that don't look like us?
Well, that's very interesting, because you're absolutely right that certain fundamentalists regard UFOs as demonic. and they don't want to discuss it. They don't want the government to be involved in the research, which the Pentagon is increasingly. But on the other hand, the Vatican has a very robust presence in ufology. They have, in a strong astronomy program. They are looking into UFOs all the time because the same kind of spiritual issues that surround religious apparitions and religious, manifestations are echoed in the UFO and alien appearances or phenomena. Let's say to take a neutral word.
Yeah.
So the Catholic Church, in particular, has been very open to these spiritual aspects, because you can't believe in miracles, so-called, or religious manifestations, and then say that UFOs can't exist, or that this other dimension can't exist.
Well, I mean, how odd is it that it is socially acceptable for us to have churches across the country for people to proclaim the existence of God with very little evidence, but to completely deny the possibility of UFOs with the preponderance of evidence that exists.
That is very interesting, and it's a contradiction. And one of the things John Mack found was that people who had abduction experiences experienced a kind of a religious awakening, religious in the broadest sense of the word. They felt connected to a source or a deity. And this is what differentiated John Mack from people like Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs. They all did the same kind of research with abductees, or experiencers as they called them. But John Mack found that the people emerged with some kind of transformation. They cared more about the fate of the planet. They became more spiritual, and Hopkins and Jacobs felt more that this first of all, this was happening in an absolute reality, and not some kind of spiritual plane, which John Mack thought more was the case. But Hopkins and Jacobs all took away a much darker negative side of the alien experience, that the aliens were evil, that they were stealing our DNA, they were traumatizing people. John Mack said, they traumatize experiences, but they also emerge with some kind of more spiritual side, and almost a love for the alien beings.
Yeah. Well, it's like you were telling me you were reading the Travis Walton story, and how Travis Walton had his abduction experience, but even today he doesn't hold them at fault. In fact, he wants to kind of spread that message.
Yeah, he says a lot of his fear was, and Andrea Perrin said this too. She said that a lot of that fear immediately is just because we don't know what else to feel. Like, it's something unknown, it's something scary. And when you have time to think about it and process it, which is where Walton is now, is he's realized that things were different than how he first perceived it. And that's a very okay experience.
And the people are traumatized. I mean, there's no people who have gone through the experience. When they recounted it to John Mack, I mean, they were cursing and screaming and crying. I mean, when you lose power over your body, and your partner is paralyzed in bed next to you and can't react, and you are so you feel beamed through a solid wall or a closed window to a ship, and these alien beings are performing experiments on you and taking your sperm and eggs or whatever, the way they recounted it. That is terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
Another really interesting person I've been reading about is Thomas Bullard. I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with Thomas Bullard, but Thomas Bullard came out with the 8 events in 1989 that tend to accompany alien abductions post And it's funny because we talk about that mystical experience, and that kind of fits into number 7, which is theophany. And they get that profound mystical experience. Sometimes turns spiritual for them. Sometimes it turns into like a savior, like a savior experience. Like they feel as if, they have to spread this word and save the world, and things like that. It's really interesting. I highly recommend it. It was in one of the medical journals. It got printed in 1989. But yeah, Thomas Bullard has a really interesting
Eddie, I guess is what they call him, Eddie Bullard. He's in my book. He's a folklorist. And he did some very important work relating abduction experiences to a whole history of other, anomalous experience, Irish fairy stories, and everything. So he sees it in a really broad context, and he is one of my heroes, I must say.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. We talk a lot about that too, because John Keel talks a lot about tying in those old fairy experiences and old folklore, being just the terminology they used for that time to describe similar abduction experiences or contactee experiences.
Right.
As
That's
we
a very important
today.
point. That in the beginning, John Mack saw abduction experiences as something sort of apart from everything else, it's kind of a singular experience. And the more he studied it, and later in his life, he began to relate it to other paranormal experiences, including ultimately death and survival of consciousness after death experience. But he saw it was related to a lot of other things that we can't explain. Crop circles and cattle mutilations and Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster, and so it doesn't exist all by itself. There's a lot of other things that are puzzling.
Right. And that's something that we talk about quite a bit, is about how all of this stuff that makes up, paranormal, I don't even think is a fitting word anymore, but just that makes up everything. All this stuff kind of rolls together, that it's all related somehow, that it's all a part of a bigger puzzle that we haven't quite figured out.
Yeah, puzzle is the right word. Charles Fort, the great anomalist, said, and I quote in my book, it's like looking for a needle no one ever lost in a haystack that never was.
Yeah.
Yes, that is 100% perfect. Yeah. And it's great though, because I think we are starting to finally see a lot of these separate communities of the paranormal are starting to come together a lot more, and are starting to move along that unified line that they are all somehow similar, yet different. And so
I gotta disagree. I mean, from what I see, the communities are still pretty much apart, and they look down on each other. Like people who follow Bigfoot, they think that the abductees, have got it all wrong. And the people who, who are into crop circles or near-death experiences, they think that, the cattle mutilation people are way off base. I mean, maybe you see them coming together. Maybe I missed that, but.
We interview so many different people all the time that, I agree with you. I still think the majority is still very separate, but I definitely see a movement happening more than I've ever seen in the past, especially looking back at things. We're starting, a lot of the people that we interview and things like that are starting to move towards that. I'm starting to see more documentaries and things like that beginning to move towards that direction. But yeah, it is still very separate. We've got friends in different fields, and there are still some that are my sister is one. She's a medium. She can speak to the dead. But if you talk to her about UFOs and aliens, she thinks you're crazy.
Wow. That's a good example. Oh my God.
She really does.
Well, you were talking about earlier about the trauma associated with being an abductee and a contactee and an experiencer. And I wonder how much of that trauma is also because of the societal expectation or a norm or label that goes along with being I don't doubt that that they're having a traumatic experience in the actual abduction, but then when they are coming back to the regular world and now they don't really have a voice or an opportunity to share their experience and not be ridiculed or laughed at.
No, that's a big part of it. That John Mack found that he could, they're called patients or subjects. It's confusing, but whatever they are, the people he studied, let's say, found that they were ostracized, that they couldn't speak out. People couldn't ridicule them. People thought they were crazy if they started speaking out. And that was about the worst part of it. I mean, they could deal with the other stuff because they did have this transformational experience. But the idea that they couldn't really confide in anybody, they couldn't talk to anybody, and they knew their kids were, because it runs in families, that the kids were also subject to this, and they still couldn't talk about it. That it really is a terrifying part of it. And that's our fault. That's society's fault, because we put this onus on them. But you're right. That is a really terrifying part of the experience.
Well, we have things like MUFON and NUFORC, which are organizations to report UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings and stuff like that. But what doesn't really exist that I'm aware of is any sort of a national or even international support mechanism for folks who are
there's small groups. I'm in touch with some of them. And the groups come together, and they all have a common experience, experience to share, and they do support each other. But these are small private things. They're not, large scale, national program, and they're very individualized. So they exist, but they're under the radar.
Well, and I feel like you have to, go to a special door and knock 3 times and then stand on one leg in order to find.
Yeah, right. Because they don't want to be exposed. I mean, people have jobs that they're afraid of losing if they're exposed as an experiencer. So it really is like a super secret AA meeting, but much worse, because you can admit you're an alcoholic and still, get acceptance. But if you say that you're an experiencer and you've been taken aboard spacecraft and your baby was, your pregnancy was taken away, and then you later were allowed to visit your hybrid child, see how that flies.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and it's not just that. I mean, you look at hauntings or cryptid sightings or anything like that, because we get people a lot that send us. We do listener stories every episode where people will send in our listener stories, and somewhere upwards towards 50% of them ask us to use a different name almost every time, and they listen to our show consistently, but they're just still, and these are just your normal, I felt something grab my foot one night while I was sleeping in this haunted house, and they're like, please use a different name. I don't want people to know. It still exists there, and a lot of them will preface to us too, hey, please don't think I'm crazy, but this, and we're like, you're sending it to us, we don't.
John Mack said that some people only contacted him through a mail drop, and then it was like a spy story that they had to meet in some out of the way place under a phone name. That's very prevalent. It's too bad, but that's the truth.
Yeah, and like I said, and it's not just abductees. I mean, we're talking simple hauntings, or they thought they saw a Bigfoot in the woods. I mean, it's all around, but especially abductees. Though I will amend that and say, especially that, though, there is more of a stigma than anything on that.
There are a handful of people who are open and willing to, let's say, I hate to say be brave, because just sharing your story is an act of bravery, in my opinion, but also to be able to go on record, let's say, and use your name and your voice. And I applaud those people as well. I mean, we share our experiences on this show every week. And sometimes I do worry, what happens if my employer hears this? Are they gonna, fire me or something? But as long as I don't let it affect my work, hopefully I'm okay.
Yeah,
but it is a thought that comes in my own mind.
They actually did a truthful survey of how many people had experience, they would be surprised. Now, John Mack and Bud Hopkins tried this. Robert Bigelow, the billionaire space contractor and paranormal investigator out in Nevada, he financed a poll that I talk about in my book for John Mack and Bud Hopkins, and they realized that they couldn't just ask people, have you ever been abducted? Because that wouldn't result in a very truthful answer. So they came up with all these questions called, like threshold questions. Have you ever woken up at night with the feeling of a strange presence in the room? Have you ever felt you were flying? And questions like that. And so from that, they only had like 116 respondents, but they extrapolated from that, and they came up with the extrapolation that from that 4 million Americans probably have been abducted. Well, everybody went crazy when they heard that figure. Said, "What the 4 million? That's the craziest thing I ever heard." Because why don't we ever see these people getting abducted? I mean, you never see it. So they had a hard time defending that figure. I don't know if it's true or not, but anyway, it's very hard to get a good sense of how many people have had these experiences.
Yeah, and we say that that's something we talk about all the time, that there's thousands of UFO sightings every month, thousands.
Right.
And you look at how many sightings of, say, Jesus or Muhammad is out there, maybe one this past year, in comparison, yet those are far more believable than the thousands of people who have said, hey, I saw this in the sky.
And to extrapolate that, if thousands go reported, how many don't go?
Well, that's right. I mean, when they when they count up the number of sightings, they always have to remember that these are the ones that are reported. So we don't know how many are not reported. I mean, you have to go to some trouble to call MUFON and make a report of a sighting.
Their form is not a 5-minute click through.
Nor is their interview.
Yes. So. You guys have been through that, huh?
Yeah. I had a pretty decent sighting when I moved out to Arizona this over Christmas, and I talked to them, and she grilled me for an hour and a half over the phone. It was hardcore. But
I tell a story in my book that really haunted me, it was a story of a woman who reported an abduction encounter, and she called. I think it was MUFON. And she called up and made her report, and then nothing happened. As I remember the story now, and a couple of years later, one of the investigators who had her case got in touch with her again and said, how come you never followed up? You were going to send us a report. And she said, oh, I did, and you came to the house. And the guy said, I did. And she said, yeah, you came to the house and you were driving a gray Mercedes and you were dressed all in black with brown pointy shoes and you had a little Van Dyke beard. And he said, that's interesting. So he came to the house and he didn't look anything like that. And he said, that wasn't me. So the bottom line is that story, it was a man in black. I mean, somebody came to the house.
Right. Yeah, it also sounded like Hynek a little bit too.
It wasn't Hynek. No, somebody came to the house and took her whole report. And it wasn't the guy she gave the report to. So anyway, that is fascinating. But so these stories do keep coming up.
Yeah, she's like, he just kept asking for a glass of water.
Yeah. You know what? And that happened. The guy comes to the house and he's taking the report, the strange guy, and the husband says something. He thinks something like, "Would you like a glass of water?" And he gets the message, telepathic message, like, "Stay out of this." It's like, whoa. So anyway.
Wow. Well, that's
fascinating.
A lot of the that whole reference of the Men in Black. I mean, that seems a lot of them. Those sightings, they like take a pill or ask for a glass of water. Mm-hmm. It's just it's just very weird. I'm curious because I'm gonna take us a little bit off the rails here a little bit. What are your thoughts on ultra-terrestrials, and are you familiar with that term?
No, not really.
So ultra-terrestrial is the thought that there is another species native to Earth that has lived here for millions of years and that we just don't interact with, and that some of the things that happen are this native species that is separate from humans.
I'm familiar with the stories that there are some of these UFOs or objects that disappear into caves and underwater, and so they have been observed. UFOs have been observed disappearing into orifices in the earth, let's say. So that would lead to the idea, well, there is another reality existing along with us. Now, one of the people John Mack interviewed, experiencers, said something very interesting. She said, people are always saying that the aliens must come from far, far away, and they have mastered a technology that enables them to traverse the universe, But she said that's not necessarily true. The universe can bend and twist and maybe exist. Another part of it may be existing right next to us, so that they don't have to go very far. They're right next to us because the universe has sort of folded in on itself. So that would sort of, combine with what you just said about another species or another thing existing alongside us. And, reality may be convoluted in a way that another reality is existing right alongside us. And, today in the New York Times on the front page, there was a story about a new particle found in physics that they're looking for anyway. Yeah. They think would explain some of the mystery in the universe, because they don't know very much about the universe.
Right.
Saw that. Yeah. And so, ultra terrestrial, even then at the end of the day, is a very broad term for a number of different things. There are even some people that like to refer to it, Sasquatch and other cryptids are ultra terrestrials, or even that, Richard Shaver mysteries of the Hollow Earth and things like that. Those kind of fit into the creatures people he saw, those things, or even a dimensional shift. So just like you were talking about, not even space, but just dimensional shifts. Those kind of are
considered. You just reminded me of something. I did a story recently from the New York Times on Robert Bigelow. He's, funding an afterlife contest. So I got, in order to understand Robert Bigelow, you got to do some research into Skinwalker Ranch, which he bought, ran for a while. Exactly. So I read, the book about Skinwalker Ranch, and talk about creepy. I mean, there's stuff there. Oh yeah, that really made my hair stand on end. And here's one story that I read in the account, that they were looking through an infrared scope one night, and somewhere on the ranch they saw what looked like a long tunnel, and they were watching this tunnel. The tunnel seemed to come out of nowhere. And out of this tunnel, they watched this creature crawl out of the tunnel, and it was a humanoid creature, and they could see it in the infrared scope. And it crawled out. It looked like a part beast, part humanoid, whatever, and it crawled away out of this tunnel. And that really blew my mind, because that coincides with what you just said about this other reality and creatures coming out of it, and and penetrating our reality. So,
well, and I'm sorry for our listeners who have to hear me say it again, but the human eye only sees like 0.003% of what exists around us. They estimate, because of our visibility is only the visible light, and if it's not visible light, we don't see it. So what else exists right now, walking amongst us, that is outside of the visible light that we can see?
What about the smell of dog? Dogs smell things that we have no sense of. And that's why animals often go crazy when these paranormal experiences occur, whether it's a UFO landing or cattle mutilations or whatever, that suddenly the animals detect something going on when we have no sense of it.
Yeah. That's why I liked in that article, because I recently read that article as well. You were talking about is Harry Reid's quote on Bigelow, which was that he's looked into areas other people only think about, and that's why he fascinates me. And I'm like, I would love to just spend 10 minutes.
He doesn't talk about it much. He's very shy and he's very close-mouthed. And if he would ever open up, you'd have a great show. I spent some time with him virtually, on the phone and on Skype. For my article on his afterlife contest, and he doesn't give much away.
And I appreciate that. I like that mystery because it does, though. It helps him. It's kind of like how I look at it. Like detectives will hold things close to the cloth on purpose, so that if we get a copycat out there, we'll know. Oh, that's not him. He's doing things very differently. Or if they find something out they haven't released, and I feel like Bigelow does a lot of that too. He's got a lot of truths that he's hanging on to see if anyone drops the same thing, and then he can be like,
well, he knows so much that he doesn't want to, blab a lot about it.
Well, so talking about blabbing about things, what are your, are you familiar with the Brookings report that talked about how to encounter or how for the government to deal with UFOs that was published back in the 70s?
Vaguely familiar, but I can't say I know much about it.
So the Brookings Institute put together a report back in the 70s that basically said, to sum it all down, hey, we don't think that the public is ready to hear about UFOs. So here's what you can do. Here's some things that you can do to better prepare them so that maybe they'll be ready to accept it in, however many years.
Because they believed it would cause panic.
Yeah, panic, and religion would break down, and anarchy and all this kind of stuff. So, obviously you've written a book highlighting a lot of the, what Mack found as it relates to this stuff. You yourself have said it's changed your viewpoint on things. Do you think the general public is ready for a mass announcement to say we are being visited?
I think the public is more ready than the government thinks it is. And I think that, the posture that the government took for so many years after World War II, that this stuff was secret and this, had to be put a lid on it and accuse anybody who does UFO research of being a communist and discredit them. The government really did have a disinformation program because it felt very threatened by this. So the government certainly felt, it couldn't disclose this stuff, partly for good reason, because they were dealing with a very frightening reality that there were these objects coming into our space, and we didn't know anything about them. We didn't know if they were hostile. We couldn't duplicate their technology. And these were the people who were, charged with protecting us, and they couldn't do a damn thing about it. So they felt very scared, and they felt they didn't want to admit that they felt powerless. Okay, so that's, one good reason you could say that the government was reluctant to share this information. But I think by now, so many people have been exposed to these stories, including the stories we wrote in the New York Times, that the public is more ready and they're more freaked out by the failure of the government to acknowledge what everybody knows. I mean, so many people have seen UFOs, and so that to be told that what they're seeing is, swamp gas or,
or a balloon
in the clouds. I mean, that turns them against the government. So I think we're at a point now, and I think the government realized that's why there is more openness about discussing this, and that's why the government, the Navy now admitted that the videos we put out from the New York Times, they were genuine, and that there's going to be a report to Congress. I don't know if it's going to be on time, but it's going to be a report. So the government has moved.
Yeah. I was going to say real quick is, one of the things, and I don't remember who said it, but we've quoted it before. We talked about the military industrial complex, how they need certain monsters to continue the funding. And the guy said it'll start with the Nazis, continue with the communists, and then they're going to go after the terrorists. Then it's going to be about terrorists. And after the terrorist movement has moved out of their purview, it'll then be from outer space. Is what that person said, is how the government, and it's interesting that terrorism is starting to take a backseat a little bit, and we're starting to see this idea that disclosure is happening, especially with Lou Elizondo and them kind of pushing a threat.
Well, it's true that the way to get money out of Congress is to emphasize the threat aspect, because you're not going to get money out of Congress by saying we want to investigate, life on other worlds. So you got to present it that way, that this is for national security. And in fact, it is a kind of a security question, because whoever, whatever has this technology, it's technology that we don't possess, that probably obviously no country on earth possesses. So So it is a security question. I mean, that if these powers or forces or whatever is behind this technology decides to operate in a hostile way, although they haven't so far, right? Then we are powerless. So it's not so far-fetched to say, let's assume the worst and how we're going to, protect ourselves. But, I think that thinking now has to shift a little.
Agreed.
Something that I was going to mention, going back, I think that people have uncovered newspaper clippings going back into the 1800s, where people reporting basically UFO contactee reports. They classified them as airships, I think.
The aerial balloon ships.
But still, in the 1800s, nobody had airships that could do what they were seeing.
Not at that point, no.
Right. So obviously, I'd say obvious. I say obviously. Maybe it's not obvious, but I would think that the government would have heard about those things prior to 1947, when kind of stuff started hitting the fan a little bit.
No, absolutely right. I talk about, I do a quick history of UFOs for my book, and I do take it back to the 1800s and earlier, but certainly in the 1800s, before there were heavier than air craft. In other words, there were balloons, obviously from the 1700s, but the powered flight didn't start till the Wright brothers. In 1903.
Right.
So, and yet in the 1800s, there were reports of these phantom airships landing and humanoids or humans coming out and interacting with the populace. And there were articles in the paper
and asking for water.
That's right. I talk about that. Who has a good history of this is Jerome Clark. Really one of the great heroes of mine, who wrote the UFO Encyclopedia, 2 volumes, which is absolutely authoritative. And Clark went back and he found some of these newspaper accounts, not just one account, but many accounts. And they really are astounding. There's one guy, a guy named Wilson, who keeps showing up around the country with this airship. And Clark looked for him in the census records and never could find him.
That's what John Keel did too. It's like John took he found all these newspaper articles from all over just our country alone. And he kept finding so many things were happening all around the same time, but there wasn't such big national coverage at the time. So they weren't being reported as these flaps of UFOs happening, but he would notice these patterns and these things that would happen. And it's just fascinating, the work that he had to do back then, where now we're like Google.
The research was prodigious. And to go back years ago to pull this together was really hard. Now everything is out there, but the problem is so much is out there that you can't tell what's true, what's not true.
Yeah. I mean, that's that is a big problem, I think, nowadays, is that I'm going to be, just earlier today, I was on Instagram kind of scrolling through, and I follow all these people who post videos and pictures and all this kind of stuff of craft, and everything I look at now, I question if it's real or not, simply because the amount of fakes that people produce. And there's apparently an app on your phone where you can take any video and it'll insert a UFO into the video so that you can produce a UFO video.
And actually it looks pretty good.
You're absolutely right. And and you know what? The documents that we looked at the New York Times are the same way, that there are authentic CIA documents with little changes in them that were put out maybe to throw adversaries off the track. But now it's so hard to tell whether a document is completely authentic or partly authentic and partly fake, and it's just poisoned the well to the point where you can't say anything is true.
I can't remember the guy's name, but he's since, I think, come forward and said he's not going to, he's not doing it anymore. But I can't remember his name, but he was for the Air Force, a disinformation agent for many years.
The Mirage Men story with Doty and how they made crazy.
Yeah, that's it. And so, he's come forward now and said, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it's funny, he's talking about all the things that they did to try to spread this, this wrongful information.
It's terrible.
Around
and look, even worse, the MK Ultra scandal. It sounds like, you made it up. If you tell people, oh, MK Ultra, it sounds like, a cartoon story or a comic book villain.
Right.
But man, this happened. The government was giving, psychedelic drugs to unsuspecting people. And one of the people in my book who actually got John Mack first interested in UFOs, she later claimed that she was a victim of MK Ultra. You'll never prove it because they destroyed all the records. And the congressional investigation, the church committee that looked into this in the 70s verified that they couldn't get the documents anymore because they were destroyed. But this was a heinous program by the government, and somebody should have gone to jail. But it was all stuck under the rug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And if that was there, what else? And it took people digging in to try to find out about MK Ultra. Like it took Congress trying to dig and things like that. It's like, what else is out there that we've heard about that will come clean eventually? But then at the same time, it's like, well, what else is just not?
Like a conspiracist right. When you say things like, well, the Roswell documents, some of the Roswell documents disappeared. So, oh, that sounds, like you were. Well, they did disappear, and maybe they'll be found someday. But the messages back and forth, I don't know what happened at Roswell. I'm not one of those people who believe absolutely that the story, alien bodies were removed from. I've seen that in print. I've read the books. I don't know whether I believe it, but the trouble is that well has been so poisoned, Roswell. You can never figure out now anymore what really happened. You have all the different accounts of people and, Jesse Marcel's son, I guess, and all the people coming forward. But the time to have done that investigation was at the time. And now it's impossible to go back. Too much has disappeared.
Well, and it's something I found anecdotally, I think, is interesting. Just recently made the connection. In June of 1947 is when the Armstrong event happened, where it was dubbed flying saucers. Then later in July is when the Roswell was in July. Then the Air Force was created in September of the same year. I find it interesting that your all's article came out in New York Times, and then the next year Space Force was announced.
Yeah, maybe. There are people who do play around with numbers, and they see significance and all that stuff.
That's Josh.
3 years, 2 days, and 4 hours after this, and then I don't know. You can make numbers do all kinds of things. But what's interesting, I found, and it's in my book, is that Ken Arnold, when he spotted those UFOs in '47, and that was like the dawn of the UFO era, because that was when it first came to consciousness, even though there were many sightings during World War II, let's say. But Ken Arnold's report was the first, large-scale public announcement of this, that there were quite a number of other people. I quote in my book, I think 20 other people who saw UFOs in the Cascades in the Mount Rainier area, that day. Yeah. So it was not just Ken Arnold who saw it, and say, well, one guy, he made a mistake. Right. But other people saw him at the same time in the same area.
Yep. The downside to me for some things is when people do things and then you find out later it was obviously done for money. And I was listening to a podcast the other day. They were talking about the famous alien autopsy tape, right? That was like a big. I remember I was like, oh my God, when it came out, and it was this big deal and all this stuff. And then 20 years later, guys like, yeah, we filmed that. That really wasn't real, but the original tape was so degraded we couldn't show it to you, so we had to redo it. But it looked. This is what he says 20 years later, and of course he has no idea where the original tape is. And it's like stuff like that just irritates me. It's like, because that's the kind of stuff that makes everything look hokey.
Well, and especially if that event is what started you down your path of, then you start to really question everything. Has everything from that point been, wrong, or did I make it up in my head?
Hoaxes are very damaging. I tell a story in my book about the Donna Bassett hoax of John Mack. And what happened is, he saw a lot of experiencers, and the stories were all completely wild. I mean, one story was wilder than the next, obviously. The encounters these people remembered having, let's say, or experienced having, in whatever reality. So then this woman comes forward, and she sounds like an experiencer, and she said, I want John Mack to help me. And she goes to see him, and she tells him a story that she was on a spaceship during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and she was on a spaceship with the Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev and John F. Kennedy, and Khrushchev sat in her lap and was crying. And she's telling the story, and John Mack was totally enthralled. I mean, I must say, he was naive at times, but he'd heard a lot of crazy stories, so here was another one, and he was totally captivated by this story. And he said, tell me more, tell me more. So anyway, afterwards, Donna Bassett said she went to Time magazine and said she made it all up, and she was I forgot the word she was using, but a debunker. I mean, she was there to expose John Mack. She thought he was full of it, and she was there to expose him. So, and Time magazine, of course, it came out with a big attack on John Mack, calling him the man from outer space. And it was very damaging to him, because it cast into doubt all the other things he had written and all the other stories he had collected. So anyway, now John Mack said he believed that Donna Bassett really was an experiencer after all, because she had told him and other people, including Whitley Strieber, about experiences she had had, and they seemed authentic to John Mack. So it sounded to him like she really was an experiencer, but then she had made up this story for some other reason to discredit him. But anyway, that hoax was very damaging, and these hoaxes are like poison in the body politic, because they create doubt. What is authentic and real.
Well, unfortunately for her, it was probably she couldn't come to grips with her experiences, and if she could discredit John, it would somehow vindicate her for not having.
I don't know. He never came up with a convincing explanation of why she did this, and you could speculate forever, but it was extremely damaging. And she did say, I have this in my book. One of John Mack's assistants confronted her sometime afterwards, and this assistant to John asked her, why did you do this? Why did you, feel you had to expose John Mack? And she said, believe it or not, this is in my book, because that's how Hitler started.
Jeez. Well, we've been hearing that about Stephen Greer too, because a lot of people look at him like he's a cult leader, so people want to expose him for that same thing. They're afraid he's going to turn everyone into alienites.
I don't know.
So I think when we started out the show, you said that you had not had your own experiences, you've not seen a UFO, you've not been a contactee. Do you want to be?
Well, that's an interesting question. Probably not, because of the terror that's associated with it. First of all, I don't believe, I know there are people who say you can call them in, you can call in. I mean, Betty Hill at the end of her life believed she could do that after her experience. And there are people who say they can do that, and maybe they can. I mean, maybe they have some frequency, that enables them to tune in, and they can arrange these meetings or whatever. So it's kind of academic, because I don't have that ability, as far as I know, to do that. But no, I wouldn't say that I'm, sitting around wishing I'd be contacted.
So maybe not as a contactee or an abductee, but would you want to see an unexplained?
Yes and no. I mean, it's scary. I mean, I don't know how I would react. I did tell a story in the Robert Bigelow article. At the end of it, I told this story. It was about, Bigelow's contest for the best explanation or the best evidence of life after death. So I'm writing this article for the New York Times, and I'm lying in bed wrestling with the material that I'd collected from interviewing him and all that. And I was thinking about life after death and how am I going to tell the story and all that. And suddenly, tremendous banging in the bedroom at like 5:30 in the morning, like an explosion. And I jumped up, my wife jumped up, the dog jumped up, and it was like some giant fist had slammed the wall outside my apartment. And we looked out, and the terrace door, glass terrace door, had splintered as if some large object had hit it. It was a terrace door 12 floors up on the east side of Manhattan. And people later said, oh, maybe a bird hit it. Well, I didn't see any dead bird lying around. Maybe it was, maybe it was there's two panes of glass. It's a double pane thing to keep out the noise. So maybe there was moisture had built up between the panes of glass and exploded out. That's possible. It happened at a time when I was lying in bed thinking about, death. Now, so it was a coincidence, but it got my attention. So, do I want more things like that to happen? Not necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, I could tell you 9, 10, I guess almost a year ago, we saw a UFO in my backyard. That event has forever changed my life. Spiritually, I'm much more spiritual now than I ever was before. Constantly seeking new ideas and new ways to grow and expand my consciousness. And I constantly want to see another one. And so kind of like what we talked about for experiencers, I have a constant need to try to figure out ways to save the planet. My wife is disappointed because we switched to bamboo paper towels, and that didn't work out well. So she's like, "Don't take away my toilet paper." So, but it's like that has really ramped up. I constantly think about ways to alternative energy methods or whatever the case is. So it's really interesting because since that experience in my backyard, it has forever changed me, and I do feel like this podcast is me being able to spread that word of, there's more to life than what we see every day. And
you felt it in yourself. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. It's like when do coincidences start to become synchronicities?
Right.
Well, in the course, I talk about that in my book because after I decided to write about John Mack, I discovered that his father was a professor at City College of New York when I was a student there, and I knew his father in the English department because I was an English major. I didn't have him as a teacher, professor, but I knew who he was. So when I started writing about John Mack, I said, gee, I had run across his father in college, and then I was trying to track down a cousin of John Mack's who would fill in some biographical details because there weren't that many relatives still around. I looked everywhere for this guy. I finally found him. He was living across the street from me. So I just went across the street to interview him. So the things like that kept coming up. And then I say in my book that at night sometimes I would get a download of information, something that I remember I have to put this in the book. Now, was that the normal writer's process of wrestling with a subject during the day and then at night it sort of comes together? That's possible. Yeah. Or was it a download from the cosmos, giving me information that I needed? I don't know. Some famous scientists, Nobel Prize winners, have said that they got their inspiration from a sudden insight that they got out of nowhere. Right. I think that's very common. Even Einstein, I think, said something about that problems are resolved, scientific problem, not by working day after day on the problem, but suddenly, out of nowhere, a solution presents itself. Now, where does that come from?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Well, you're making me think now.
I know. We've reached the portion of the show where we're just going to sit and think about things.
Quick, quiet show.
Ralph.
The thing that got John Mack interested in, or prepared the way, let's say, for his interest in alien abduction stories and paranormal events, started really when he took up holotropic breathing. Stan Grof was a psychiatrist from Czechoslovakia who was experimenting with LSD, and then he was experimenting with altered states of consciousness without drugs by regulated breathing.
Yeah.
And as soon as John Mack heard that, he was all gung-ho for it. So he...
Yeah, we've been getting into the holotropic breathing. You guys know what it is.
I don't know how many of your listeners know, but it's regulated breathing, and that eventually, at least to some people, it can move you into an altered state of consciousness. So John Mack tried this, and so for a half hour, he's doing the breathing, and he's not feeling anything, and he says, how long am I supposed to do this? And suddenly, he felt himself drawn back to his childhood. He was in the womb, and he was being born. And he felt his mother struggling, turning blue, trying to give birth to him. And his mother, who later died when he was 8.5 months old, and leaving him with a trauma all his life. Anyway, he imagined the difficult process his mother had giving birth. And then suddenly he saw himself in medieval Russia, and he was a Russian peasant, and a Mongol warrior was decapitating his son. So he's thinking, oh my God, afterwards, is this a past life? And then he said, no, it's probably not a past life. It's probably just consciousness is fluid and it's traveling around. And my consciousness moved to this period in Russia, and that's how I saw myself. So anyway, he didn't know. There's no answer to that. But, it's a very strange world. What can I say?
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of Emanuel Swedenborg, but he
into the universe.
And so, here's this guy that essentially discovered that meditative process on his own, and that type of breathing that allowed him to essentially astral project or whatever he was doing. Right. And he traveled all around the universe and all kinds of things like that, and even has a church. So.
When I was, you just reminded me, years ago, I read a book called Peter Ibbotson. I never tracked it down since then, but it was about a guy in prison who projected himself out and did all these astral travels. And I was reading this book as a kid. I mean, I've buried this memory basically till now, but, and I'm reading this book as a kid, and I was trying to figure out, was this real? Did this guy really, was this fiction or was this a real story? And to this day, I don't know. I didn't go back to the book. But it made a big impression on me, and it sounds like the same thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Sidebar: I also host a horror podcast, and we reviewed this really awful 1970s movie called The Astral Incident or something like that. And there was a guy that was a prisoner, and he astraled himself out of the bars and would go around and kill people and stuff.
Well,
that was
John Mack was interested in these stories too. When he started to realize that alien abduction is not something apart from everything else, that there's a broad, world of paranormal experiences. And he got very interested in a book called Unleashed, which I rushed out to get. It was a story of a true story of a babysitter, Resh, I think her name was, who was convicted of murder for killing a child in her care. And the book makes a real good case that the child was killed not by her, but by poltergeist activity, because she was some kind of a medium, it turned out, and she attracted, other forces into her life. Familiar. And there were actually pictures of her making a phone fly across the room and things like that. Anyway, so you talk about a horror show. I mean, imagine, being accused of murder when a child in your care is killed and you didn't kill it, but some force did. I mean, wow, that's some story.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
we've got got quite a bit of field from like you said, it's a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Well, we will not drag you and keep you forever, Ralph. We'll go ahead and wrap things up. But we just, again, thank you so much for giving us your time and just your honesty and talking to us. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, guys. I mean, I was very taken with John Mack's story. I hope people realize the courage it took for him to investigate this area at the cost of his career, which suffered when Harvard, was not happy with his research, and they investigated him. And in the end, he wasn't charged with anything. He was basically exonerated, but it cost him a lot of money. And he was put through the ringer. So I think at the end of my book, I say that he really fits Joseph Campbell's definition of a hero's journey.
Yes.
So anyway, thanks for reading the book, and I glad you enjoyed it.
Well, and I'd say thank you for writing the book, because
for putting his story out there.
Well, you take your own risk, right? So I mean, yes, we're a little more open to things now, but you also take your own risk in writing the book.
I mean, I don't compare my risk to his, because it's a writer's project for me and for him as a psychiatrist to validate these stories. I mean, there's always a question of how much he bought into the stories, and he tried in some way to distance himself. And the people, his detractors, were accusing him of enabling these people. That these people, were basically unbalanced, and you came in, John Mack, and you told them that it really happened, and it's your fault for making them crazy. And he said, no, I didn't enable them. These people suffered some kind of a real experience in some dimension that I don't understand. But all I did was listen to them and give them a platform.
Yeah.
So
that's why he's so fascinating to me, was his consistent viewpoint was just that he was just listening and saying, okay, I'll hear you
when
out.
others wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah.
And for that, well, people can go. We know you can go to your website, ralphblumenthal.com, check out there, as well as New York Times and Amazon, to get anything from you, which is hell worth digging into, because it has been just a pleasure for me to do some research just on you and your works and just get to know you.
And there's a lot of starts to rabbit holes in the book.
Yes.
So.
But thank you, sir, so much. We appreciate you, and you are welcome on our show anytime, sir. Anytime you got anything going on, you let us know.
Great. Well, thank you, guys. A lot of fun. All right. Good night.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I will thank you a bazillion times. I already want to buy a whole box of thank you cards and just send you one every week, because and I know that's funny, but I actually really kind of mean it, because we definitely get awestruck sometimes on this show. Don't get me wrong. But just Ralph, I admire the hell out of journalists, and I always admire a journalist perspective. And, you heard us talking about, he's done other stories, like on Bigelow and things like that. But just stuff outside of that realm as well. His work is incredible. There's a reason why he won the awards that he did. And the book, The Believer, is just fascinating, because not only are you reading Mack's story, but you're getting these moments of Ralph putting himself in the midst of all this as well. So
I mean, the book is phenomenal. I highly recommend, if you haven't already picked it up, to pick up a copy. And there are so many accounts documented in the book. I was listening in the car the other day with my wife, the Leslie Kean book, which we talked about in the interview with Ralph, about it being very much about like sightings and of actual craft and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I asked my wife, because she is so much of a skeptic, can she admit now that there's no question of, do you believe in UFOs? Because UFOs have been
with all of the stories and the accounts that have been passed along, the fact that there are UFOs is just that. It is a fact.
It's unidentified.
Right. But so I would say that Ralph's book, The Believer, really starts to I think solidify that contact is a fact. Contact with what? We don't know, but there are enough accounts of contact and from abductees and just contactees to be able to say that it's no longer do you believe that people are contacted. It is yes, they are contacted. Now let's try to figure out why, by what, so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was watching this documentary and they were talking about Jesus and the Zodiac and how, every 2,000 years you get into that new age, right? And there was a new age right around the time that Jesus came, and that was Pisces, was the age that was coming, the fisher. Right? Jesus was the fisher of men.
Right.
That's what Pisces is. And that there were 12 apostles, which each one represented a sign of the zodiac, with Jesus being the sun, S-U-N, right? Being the main thing there. And it was quite fascinating, and that we're getting ready to move into the age of Aquarius, and that he even sets that up, like it talks about in the Bible. He says these different things, that there will come a time and blah, blah, and it really fits into the idea of what Aquarius is. But I just found that so fascinating. It was on a show called Glitch. It's just like it almost feels like a YouTube show, but it's like a half hour long, and it's on Amazon Prime. It's just clips and things like that, but they talked about it on there. I think it's on their second episode. But yeah, it was really interesting to think about that here's the 12 zodiacs. The fisher of men was Pisces, and they were moving into the age of Pisces, and it was just fascinating.
So what's if the Pisces is the fish, what's the Aquarius? Is that a horse?
It's been a minute. Let me see. Aquarius.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because a lot of people think that we've already entered.
He's the water. He's the water barrier.
Okay.
And so that's right, because they talked about, that's one of the reasons why they talked baptism being such a big thing as well, to get yourself ready for the age of the Aquarius, which was all about water. And to your thing, if you've listened to the show enough, and then on Astral Stew, we talked about water being God, right?
Yeah.
Constantly. So find that very, very interesting. But yeah, I'll leave that at that. I just wanted to throw that out there because it's just fascinating, and all this Ralph stuff has just made me think. But I do want to quickly get into our listener story real quick. We've got something we haven't had in a long time, is someone's actually sent us a voice recording of their listener story. This story comes from a listener who's going by the moniker of Kang to keep his anonymity private, but he has a fascinating story. So buckle your seatbelt, because it's an interesting one.
I have a pretty interesting story as far as the paranormal goes. As a young man, as a young child, I was very enamored, like so many people, with paranormal stories, beings, and all types of supernatural occurrences. And I suppose the one amazing bit of insight and wisdom I had as a young teenager, not that as a teenager I had much insight or wisdom, but I did have one really good idea that popped in my head. I would watch what amounted to paranormal TV shows and what few Bigfoot videos there were of people trying to solve these mysteries and walk through the forest and do all kinds of attempts to uncover the truth behind the supernatural mysteries. And one thing I thought was, gosh, that looks like a lot of work. I don't really want to walk hundreds of miles through the forest and find nothing. And I hatched this really good idea. I wasn't going to go look for paranormal mysteries. I wasn't going to become an investigator. I wasn't going to become a Bigfoot hunter. I was going to go and talk to people throughout all the cultures of the world who claimed to have the ability to interact with Bigfoot, to see paranormal creatures, interact with paranormal creatures, fight the negative forces of the world, and try to get them to teach me. I figured I had a better chance of convincing some human to teach me these things than I did of convincing a Bigfoot to talk to me in the middle of the forest. And so for the next 20 years, I talked to every Taoist priest, shaman, Native American, any Native American who would talk to me about the subject. And I pretty much annoyed people of all different practices and faiths throughout the entire world. Like, I annoyed them. I straight out was annoying. And I would ask, and I would ask, and I would ask, and I would ask, and through a long, strange series of events, about 20 years later, somebody said, yes, I'll teach you. And it was a shamaness from the Newari region of Nepal. And she taught me all manner of things. She taught me how to interact with Bigfoot. I've probably spent about, at this point, after about 7 years of doing it, I've probably spent about, I would say, 7 or 8 hours within 30 feet of 50 different individuals over the years. 50 different Bigfoot individuals. I've seen old ones, I've seen young ones, I've seen big ones. Well, they're all big. Men, women, families. I've seen groups of them. A couple groups of them. And I have seen other creatures that I didn't even know existed till I saw them. And one of the creatures that I saw I didn't even mean to call. Now, the secret to interacting with a lot of these creatures, the foundational secret, really is just a matter of specific exercises, meditations that are designed to raise your energy to go in certain directions, and, for lack of a better way of saying it, certain spiritual temperatures. That is the real secret. That is the real trick. These paranormal creatures and these paranormal entities all have energy that runs a certain way. And if you do those meditations, that allows them to see that you understand a certain energetic construct. And that is just the basics of why I and one other person have been able to have so much success in interacting with the paranormal. The second factor is there are specific items that you need that greatly help the beings that you want to talk to come out. Specific offerings. And one thing I want to say is people call it gifting, and they leave things out there. And there's one minor difference between what I would do and what they do. And the difference is that when I leave a gift, I then transfer the energy of that gift into the spirit world. I don't just leave something. So a lot of these beings interact in the physical realm and the spiritual realm simultaneously. They have that capacity, which is the main reason that no one's ever found them, is that they have access to more information about an area than humans. So they can move through it in such a way as to not be seen. Just because they're able to see more of the reality of what is there than humans do. Anybody who's ever been to church and lit a candle and did a prayer or did something in a church or a sacred temple in which you left an offering that was meant to be seen in the spiritual realm of that faith has the understanding on how to take an offering and transmit that energy of that offering into the spirit realm. And that is the big difference, or one of the big differences, as to why I've been able to have such big success. People are just leaving the things. They don't throw the energy of their gift to the beings they intended. And it's a very simple thing, but people just have to spend a few minutes to do it. Well, in the early days when I was doing it, I was in Western New York, on top of a mountain, and I didn't have all the specific items that I needed to try to interact with the Bigfoot of the area. But I had some pretty tasty items. It was just, some fruits, some vegetables, all that kind of stuff, but I had a lot of it. So I went out on top of the mountain to a place that was sort of near where I'd had success before, and I left it on a tree stump and I did all the things to call, Bigfoot at the time, and then I went for a walk up the mountain, thinking that if they would come out, they would find me. About 15 minutes later, I saw what I thought at the time was the biggest elk that I thought must have ever existed. It probably was about 7 feet at the shoulder. And for the life of me, I swear, there are no elk in Western New York, but for the life of me, I was like, wow, that's an elk. And then I saw its tail. And its tail was about 6 feet of pure white and about 2 feet wide, and it was standing straight up. It was walking in a way that I had never seen anything walk. It was intelligent, it was playful, and then I saw another one right after it. So I saw this whole pack of about 7 huge, massive elk-like creatures. But they had the strangest face of an elk I'd ever seen. It kind of looked like a long, like a cross between like a camel and an elephant face. So it had this long snout. And they were looking at me and smiling, like you just knew that they were really kind and wonderful creatures, and I had never seen anything like that, and I had never even heard of anything like that. And to see something, or 7 or 8 of these individuals who were so massive, it invoked in me something that I've heard in other people. And what that thing is when someone sees a being that they believe does not exist, the part of your mind that has an accepted reality starts to rebel and label it as something you know. And that occurred for, I would say, 30 seconds. It was the breaking of my conditioned reality. And even though I said to my girlfriend who was with me, oh, look at those deer. She goes, yes, they're deer. It took us 30 seconds to even say the words, those aren't deer. And these huge, what I later learned were Auckleys. All these beings were about 50 yards down, and they started running around in a happy thing and stamping their feet, getting up on their hind legs, and these truly majestic, huge beings then just ran away. This was during the day. It was around 11 a.m. It was a cold winter day. There wasn't much snow on the ground. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, something had happened, and then what do? You just stand there in a state of kind of humorless disbelief. But they were gentle creatures. And eventually, a couple weeks later, when I got to tell my teacher this story, she said they sounded like Achlis, and it's spelled Achlis. I looked it up online, and it's a mythological creature that the only reference for it I found was in the original translation of Julius Caesar's commentaries. He claimed to have seen the same beasts running through Europe during his campaigns. Anyway, I've never seen those creatures again. I don't know what the meaning of it all was. One of the dangers of interacting and calling these paranormal beings is that it's an imprecise science. You are hoping for one thing, but that you could accidentally call another. So, that is the short and skinny of my story. That is how I came to see the beings known as Achlis.
So thank you so much, Kang. I've listened to this 4 or 5 times now, and I'm still just unpacking it all. And you said something interesting to me when we were talking about it in private.
Yeah, so the long noses to me reminds me of the description of the Darrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so, were those Darrow that are coming forth? Because, to kind of entice a little bit more about the stuff with terrorists provided some details about the Darrow and the Tarot, which if you want to know more, you can go to FearScapePodcast.com/support and join our Patreon.
Yep, wristwatch.
Yeah, wristwatch.
Yeah, we've got some cool stuff going on about that Terry wrist stuff. We are still digging deep. There's a lot more stuff that's been happening. We're going to share everything little bits at a time to let you guys know. But I find it fascinating that Kang sends us a story with something that feels like a Darrow.
Yeah, and relates back to that stuff from Terry. So yeah, it's very interesting indeed.
Yep. So again, I know Josh just said it, but if you want to get into the investigation with us and figure out and find out the pieces of what's going on with our newfound relationship with the possible terrorist who has contacted us, make sure to go to FearScapePodcast.com/support. Get on our Patreon, join Wristwatch. You'll be able to join the investigation with myself, Josh, Santosh, and Olav, and hopefully Alan Greenfield soon. So we want to wish him well. We know he's not feeling very well, so just want to wish him well. Yep. But yeah, I'm just fascinated. We got a lot of stuff going on. April 23rd, guys, we've got the Psychic Social Experiment number 4 is happening. We still have tickets available for that. We're going to have Keith Age, the Rock and Roll Goal Hunter. Oh, the Rock and Roll Goal Hunter there. And we got Scotty Rourke coming on. He is a famed medium who's just absolutely fantastic and awesome. If you guys have not seen, we're getting those previous episodes of the Psychic Social Experiment out on YouTube soon. Those will be out there for you guys to see what's going on. But this changes every episode as well. So you get to be a part of the live studio audience and get to take part in this Psychic Social Experiment with us. So you can go to FearScape. Is it podcast or media?
FearScapeMedia.com/psychic.
Yep. So yes, because this is a production of the FearScape Media Network with Black Leather there. That's right. So yeah, fearscapemedia.com/psychic. Tickets are only $6. Totally worth it. Get to join in on the Zoom. It's fantastic. Plus Keith's going to talk to you for like 12 hours about all the cool shit he's done before. Just it's a good time. And just wanted to push that one more time. April 23rd, you can get tickets up until the start of the event. So. All right, Josh, anything else before we get out of here?
No, I think that's, I do remember now. Please, if you would, rate and review and share the podcast anywhere you can. Podbean, we're now on Podbean. If you don't have a Podbean account, you can create one. It's free, and you can rate us on there. Rate us on, rate and review on Apple Podcasts as well.
Yeah, the more you rate and review, the more we're able to get sponsorships, and the more we need to we get to stop begging you for money. So, but yeah, please get out there and rate and review. It's the best thing possible that you can do besides sharing it for us, especially on Podbean and Apple and some of those places, because they are directly where we get our sponsorships from. So, but we appreciate you guys. We love you guys so much. And we got a really great show next week. We've got Krista. What's her last name? I'm sorry.
Alexander.
Krista Alexander. Sorry, Krista, if you're listening. She has a really fantastic documentary on Amazon Prime right now called Lights in the Sky. We've both watched. We absolutely love it. And if you want to kind of follow along, if you haven't yet, you can watch that and in between until next week so you can kind of follow along. If not, I'm sure talking to her will get you to want to watch it because it's fascinating. But we will catch you guys next week. Thank you guys so much for always tuning in and listening to FearScape Paranormal Podcast here on the FearScape Media Network. We love you guys so much. New Astral Stew just dropped a couple days ago. Check that out with us and Santosh talking about eating celebrities. It's weird. And but we're going to get out of here. Thank you guys so much. This has been Stefan. Don't forget, keep your eyes on the skies.
This has been Josh. The truth is now.
And remember, folks, hold those blankets extra tight because things can tend to get spooky when you're listening to FearScape. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
We hope you have enjoyed this guidepost on the road of high strangeness with us. And we thank you, as always, for listening and joining our caravan to the weird and unknown. Please consider supporting us as we continue our journey to find the answers we all seek. FearScapePodcast.com/support.